Totaling an area of just 426.25 square miles, and with a population of 7 million, there are approximately 16,150 people per square mile in Hong Kong, making it a pretty cramped place to make movies. And yet Hong Kong has been making movies, and lots of them, since the turn of the last century. At its peak, the Hong Kong film industry produced over 300 films a year, and in 1973 it created an international sensation when it helped to create Bruce Lee's fourth and final film, Enter the Dragon, which was filmed entirely in Hong Kong. In terms of its locales, Enter the Dragon stands halfway between The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, in that while many exterior locales were used, a good number of scenes were shot on a soundstage within Golden Harvest Studios, which has long since been destroyed. These would include the famous underground cavern fight sequence, as well as various interior sets such as Han's Banquet Hall and the competitors' rooms. Fortunately, many of the exterior locales from the film are still existent. But the urban sprawl of Hong Kong has consumed key elements of many others. Fortunately, those that have survived were the backdrop to some of the most important scenes in the film. Hong Kong is also the cradle of Bruce Lee's martial arts infancy, as it was in Hong Kong that Bruce Lee began studying Kung Fu. Long before he created his own martial art of Jeet Kune Do, Lee cut his martial teeth on a Chinese martial art called Wing Chun, which was taught to him by this man, the revered martial arts master, Ip Man. And while Ip Man passed away in the winter of 1972, and his original school has long since been demolished, the art that he taught to a young Bruce Lee is still being taught to eager young Kung Fu students today by Ip Man's eldest son, Ip Chung. Ip Chung is 86 years old, a fact that is rendered meaningless when one witnesses his grace and precision in martial arts. He has been entrusted with the monumental task of safeguarding and passing on the art that his late father perfected and popularized. He teaches his students the use of the wooden dummy, a training aid in Wing Chun Kung Fu. He also teaches his students the art of Chi Sao, an exercise by which one detects and expresses the flow of energy in combat. He recalls conversations he had in years past with his father, who shared with him his opinion on how Bruce Lee became such a great martial artist. It is somewhat ironic that Ip Man died just as the ink was drying on Lee's contract to film Enter the Dragon, a film that would introduce Kung Fu to the entire world. And as Enter the Dragon was the first Kung Fu film seen by many people in North America, The opening shot from this film represented their first introduction to the world of Chinese martial arts. And what better institution to represent the world of martial arts than the cradle of Kung Fu itself, the Shaolin Temple? Unfortunately, the real Shaolin Temple isn't located in Hong Kong, but Songshan in the Henan province of Dengfeng, China. As with the Shanghai Park scene in Fist of Fury, an alternate location was used as a stand-in for the real Shaolin Temple. And the producers selected the Ching Chung Kun Temple in the Tuen Mun district of Hong Kong as its replacement. While the Shao in Shaolin refers to Mount Sahoshi, a mountain within China's Songshan mountain range, Ching Chung Kun translates as Green Pine Temple and is a Taoist temple, and one of the more popular tourist sites in Hong Kong. The temple and ornamental gateway seen in the opening shot of Enter the Dragon are still present, as are a wealth of other historical treasures. Ching Chung Kun opened originally as a rural retreat in 1949. And dotted around its well-designed grounds are pagodas, pavilions, ornamental archways, quadrangles, towers, Chinese gardens, and fish ponds, all enclosed by trees, shrubs, flowers, and potted plants. The temple also plays host to lanterns from Beijing's Imperial Palace. The opening fight sequence in Enter the Dragon was actually the last fight sequence filmed, as Lee took it upon himself to film and direct it after shooting had wrapped. It is a martial art tour de force, as here is Bruce Lee wearing full contact gear and performing all aspects of martial art: kicking, striking, ground fighting, defense, and offense, the whole package. And having such control that his opponent isn't killed, but rather submits of his own volition. This entire sequence was not filmed at Ching Chung Kun, but rather in a small wood behind a village in the far northern New Territories called Ho Shing Hung, a site that has long since grown over and is presently inaccessible. The scene was actually filmed a mere 10 minutes away from Shengxi, where Lee filmed a fight scene for The Way of the Dragon, an area that has itself long been covered over, although not with flora, but apartment complexes.
The Qingshan Monastery in Hong Kong. Its origins are supposed to have dated back 1,500 years ago when it was founded by a Buddhist monk from India. It also played host to some of the most famous scenes in Enter the Dragon. There was a scene that was filmed here in 1973 involving Bruce Lee and a monk played by Roy Chow.
A good martial artist does not become tense but ready. Not thinking yet not dreaming. Ready for whatever may come. When the opponent expands, I contract. And when he contracts, I expand. And when there is an opportunity, I do not hit. It hits all by itself.
It was a scene that contained a lot of Bruce Lee's personal philosophy, and the producers of the film thought for some reason that would be above the heads or beyond the interest of most of the Western viewers. Well, how wrong they were. The scene was cut from 1973's version, but in 1998 Warner Brothers restored it and released it in their home DVD version.
The name of the Indian Buddhist monk who founded the monastery was Pui To, who is said to have traveled around in a wooden teacup. Legend has it that this cup-traveling monk eventually came to Hong Kong's Castle Peak and was so attracted by the peace and serenity of the place that he decided to settle down here. He is said to have built a small cabin there, and upon his death, his disciples erected a small pagoda on its site.
Also at the Qingshan Monastery was filmed a very famous martial arts sequence, probably the most famous martial arts instructional sequence in all of action cinema history. And it's filmed literally 20 feet below where the monk scene with Roy Chow was filmed, so the camera crew didn't have to walk too far. And when Tung Wai, who played the young student, ascended these stairs, he was met by his teacher, played by Bruce Lee, and was taught the famous finger pointing to the moon lesson, which has been oft repeated throughout Bruce Lee fandom. for over 36 years.
Let me think. Don't think. Feel. It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory.
Hong Kong action director Tung Wai was but a teenager when he played opposite Bruce Lee in this scene, having just started his career as a stuntman. He recollects the impact of Lee on the Hong Kong film industry. And while the actors appeared before the cameras in exotic temple locations, the producers and key cast members chose more modern establishments to host their production meetings. And most of the key production meetings were held here, at Hong Kong's renowned Peninsula Hotel. The Peninsula is Hong Kong's only historical five-star luxury hotel. It has even been voted the world's best hotel on more than one occasion. When the Peninsula first opened its doors in December of 1928, it was then the last stop on the Trans-Siberian Rail link that brought travelers into Hong Kong from Europe. Right from the start, the Peninsula catered to the affluent, the titled, and the famous, a fact that hasn't changed in over 80 years. Quite apart from its premier service and accommodations, the hotel also features a helipad and a fleet of signature Rolls-Royces. The cars even have their own distinctive color, Peninsula Green. During filming, the producers often ate at the hotel's famous restaurant. Gaddy's opened in 1953 and took its name from a former general manager of the Peninsula, Leo Gaddy. Its elegant dining room features crystal chandeliers from Paris, Taiping carpet, and a Chinese Coromandel screen, which dates back to 1670. There is a legend that has endured for almost 4 decades in Hong Kong, that when Bruce Lee went to Gaddy's to have dinner with the producers of Enter the Dragon, he had been in such haste that he had forgotten to wear a suit and tie. But because he was Bruce Lee, the manager waived the dress code on this one occasion. While the Gaddy's anecdote may or may not be true, it is certainly a fact that Lee did most of his production work, including his choreography planning here, at 41 Cumberland Road in Kowloon Tong.
I'm walking along a route that Bruce Lee used to jog, actually, in 1972 and 73. And he would typically finish his jog right here in front of his home, which was 41 Cumberland Road. The house has changed over the years. Mind you, it's been 36 years since he lived here. But there has been a movement recently by the Hong Kong Bruce Lee Club to have this restored to its original form and to make a museum out of it.
Lee had purchased the home in the summer of 1972. In those days, its grounds were magnificently landscaped, featuring a Japanese-style garden in addition to an ornate fish pond. A wall frieze located on the inside of the estate's perimeter still exists today, as does the small carport that is situated next to the house. It was here that Lee parked his then new candy apple red Mercedes 350 SL. His Mercedes had actually made a brief guest appearance at the very end of his third film, The Way of the Dragon. Since 1973, however, Lee's former home has changed drastically. Presently, it is a charge-by-the-hour brothel that goes by the name of the Romantic Hotel, just one of many such establishments in Kowloon Tong, providing a timelessly popular service for those who require privacy in a city where privacy is often quite limited. Aesthetically, the wide-open balconies and landscape gardens that Lee enjoyed have long since been filled in by concrete and paving slabs. Only a few tantalizing reminders of Lee's time here remain, albeit hidden from view by overzealous security guards and layers of poured concrete. The next scene to appear in Enter the Dragon required Li to leave his home in Kowloon Tong and travel to a cemetery located on the Hong Kong side of the island. Once there, Li's character pays his respects before the graves of his mother and sister. In reality, Li was paying his respects at the grave of Sheikh Akbar, a man who passed away on January 29, 1930, and was laid to rest in the Muslim section of the Hong Kong Cemetery in Happy Valley. Established in 1945, the Hong Kong Cemetery is a multi-faith cemetery, providing the final resting place for Hindus, Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Li's scene was filmed at the cemetery's highest point, requiring both he and the crew to walk its 200 steps to the top. The old AIA building that was visible in the background of Li's scene is still present, as are the original tombstones and trees. The tombstones have become more plentiful over the years, and the trees have grown much bigger. But all in all, the Hong Kong Cemetery remains one of the more intact Bruce Lee film locations, and certainly one of the more intact locations from Enter the Dragon. The scenes of Li and the rest of the fighters boarding a large junk were filmed at Aberdeen Harbour, a small harbour located on the south side of Hong Kong Island. The harbour is named after the 4th Earl of Aberdeen, George Hamilton, who was the British colonial secretary in 1843. The harbour has, as one would expect, long been associated with fishermen, serving as a locale for sea-bound fishing junks to replenish their water and offload their catches. Within the harbour resides another famous historical fixture, the floating restaurants. When Enter the Dragon filmed here, there were two of them, the Thai Pak and the Sea Palace. Presently, the Sea Palace has gone from the scene, and the Thai Pak has been incorporated into the Jumbo Kingdom, which claims to be the largest floating restaurant in the world. After their trek across the South China Sea, Li and the fighters finally arrive at Hans Island. A small rock jetty is seen jutting out from the shore as their sampan arrives at the island. Although erosion has claimed part of its walkway, this jetty still stands. Located in Tai Tam Bay, on the south side of Hong Kong Island, this jetty has a significant history, as it served as one of the key landing points on the island for the Japanese soldiers during the Second World War. The hillside behind the jetty was the site of a real battle, with many casualties, that occurred between the invading Japanese and the British and Canadian soldiers who were defending Hong Kong. Upon setting foot on Hans Island, the fighters walk past the tournament grounds and pass through a portal that finally lets them catch a glimpse of Hans' palace. The shot used in the film required the use of a zoom lens that was set up at the upper level of the same Muslim cemetery in Happy Valley that they had filmed at earlier. And the Palace of Han is, in reality, a private mansion that is located on 45 Stubbs Road in Hong Kong, and known locally by the name of King Yin Lei. The King Yin Lei Mansion was built in 1937 and is a rare surviving example of the Chinese Renaissance style. The name King Yin Lei translates as House of Virtuous Views, and that it most certainly is. Perched, as it is, on a huge sloping hillside on Hong Kong Island, with a sweeping panoramic view of the city. More recently, the mansion became newsworthy when it was sold to a local developer who thought it would be a good idea to rip off part of its roof, along with some of the building's original fixtures and fittings. A public outcry ensued, causing the Hong Kong government to step in and stop the destruction. The present owner then agreed to foot the bill for restoring the damage he caused in exchange for the adjoining land. And while King Yin Lei doubled for Han's palace in the film, the compound that was used for Han's fortress was actually the estate of renowned Hong Kong lawyer Lo Man Wai. In 1973, Chaplain Chang worked for Golden Harvest Studios and served as the assistant director for Enter the Dragon. He recalls how Lo's estate came to be selected for use in the film.
Because we all went out together to find locations, and after we passed South Key 1, Hong Kong side, and we turned over there, and we saw on our left was that empty place. We didn't know it was a tennis court or whatever. So Bob Klaus asked to stop, then we walked back, small door, we went into there, nobody was there. And we just walked, and then we realized it was tennis court. Then another step down, different level, another level down. And then we saw an old man was still there working the stonework on the slope. And so I started something like hello. So he turned and got up and we talked. And we talk about that we want to shoot at him. It looks like this place is very good and so forth. He is quite agreeable. And then Bruce Lee also come. And they talk, and suddenly they realized they were relatives.
During filming, Bruce Lee met with Lo Man Wai and discovered that they were distant relatives. Lo's expansive estate included a large mansion situated on the southwestern shore of Hong Kong Island that overlooked Tai Tam Bay. The estate sold during the 1980s and was torn down. It was replaced by the prestigious American Club, one of only a handful of private, non-profit member clubs with extensive recreation facilities for families. The martial arts training grounds in Enter the Dragon were in reality Lo Man Wai's tennis courts. The chalk lines of the Lo tennis courts are plainly visible in Enter the Dragon. Most of the tennis court walls were torn down, along with Lo's estate in 1983, to make room for both the American Club and its neighboring Pacific View apartment complex. However, some sections of the original tennis courts still remain. Revealing the same rock walls that served as the backdrop in Lee's most famous cinematic battles. Also recognizable is an upper wall section that is made of stone that was pulled from Tai Tam Bay many decades ago. A narrow walkway along one of the surviving walls appears quite similar to one that Lee used in chasing down Han during the film's epic finale. Today, it merely provides passage to a small lookout area above the tennis courts. A stairway that once had been used by Lee and other cast members to access the film's martial arts compound now serves patrons who wish to partake of a leisurely afternoon of their favorite non-contact pastime. Aerial photographs from when Enter the Dragon was filmed and present day reveal that all but one of the upper-level tennis courts have been demolished. As one examines what's left of Han's compound, one is struck by the fact that there is no room for nostalgia in industry. Stairways that once passed beneath the feet of the king of Kung Fu are now overgrown and forgotten. A lone archway remains, now bricked over to prevent entry and exit. And yet what remains is sufficient to serve up tantalizing reminders of what once transpired on this section of land almost 4 decades ago, when the greatest martial arts movie of all time, Enter the Dragon, was filmed here.